Mr. Graves, bro, you need to do your job. I mean, let's just be very clear. You know, obviously, you have a responsibility to the residents of the district in a myriad of ways. I think, you know, my colleague talked about that and went in some heavy detail there. But if you're not going to do the job of actually standing behind Chief Conti and the work that his men and women do with the Metropolitan Police Department, then you're selling them down the river, and with them, the residents of DC, and even the tourists that come to DC. But, you know, they're the ones that live here. They, you know, they ride the bus, they get on the metro, they're going to school, they're going to work, and what everybody wants is just to be safe. And you're not holding up your end of the bargain. I've seen MPD all over DC. They're out here every single day. It's not, they are here. It's very clear when they're on the scene. But you're not doing your job. So I just find it to be disgusting, frankly. Just uphold the law, enforce the law. And that actually will make the job easier for the chief and for the mayor to do their jobs. Mayor Bowser, real quick, you know, when the Oversight Committee was investigating January 6th, you were not here. I don't know what was going on, so no need to go down that road. But I really had a question about, you requested troops on you addressed National Guard troops on December 31, 2020, is that correct?
That sounds right, but I would want to confirm the dates.
That's fine.
Yep.
That's fine. That's fine. Based upon any recollection that you have, what was the rationale for requesting National Guard troops?
We wanted to make sure that our city blocks were protected, and the chief decided we were in that transition week, so the chiefs decided that we wanted to create a traffic box around certain parts of our downtown, and the best use of resources would be National Guard instead of MPD, so that MPD could be available for law enforcement. So that was our request.
Okay, so quick follow-up to that, because, you know, I remember it, having gone through orientation here before I got sworn in as a member of Congress, that during that time period, you know, to the pandemic and everything else, there was no traffic in DC, not like it is today. Like, nobody was driving through the streets of DC during that time period. So, like, and this is a legitimate question, was the concerns purely traffic corridors in the district for the date of January 6th?
Let me ask the chief to talk about how we
Sure, Chief Conti, if you can, that'd be great.
Yeah, so traffic is part of the concern. You know, certainly when we create traffic boxes, and you know we're expecting a lot of people in our city, we don't want to mix people and cars. So creating that space where for people who are expressing their First Amendment rights could peacefully be in the street or on the sidewalk or whatever, and not be hindered by cars and buses moving about. Well,
Chief, I just want to reclaim my time. I'm a minute 28. That's no disrespect to what you're saying. And my coughing, no disrespect to either.
No worries.
So real quick, now in a letter that was sent on January 5th, Mayor Bowser, you stated that the National Guard, that you were accepting the support, but you wanted them to be in an unarmed capacity. Is that correct? Or Chief Conti, can you corroborate that? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, and I thank you for that. These are some of the things that we just want to clarify. And I think here's the overarching point. And to be frank, honestly, Mayor Bowser, this really ain't got nothing to do with you. I think this is just a general point of what happened, when, and why. And I think, actually, last question for you. When your request for National Guard troops were, obviously, they were answered and you were given whatever you needed. Is that correct?
We were given, I believe, some of what we requested.
Okay. Were there any limits that came from the Secretary of the Army?
Yes.
Okay. Can anybody stipulate what that was?
Yeah, a couple of things. So we wanted, well, first of all, the limitation was we could not change their assignments without first receiving approval from the Secretary of the Army. We could not move National Guard members anywhere east of 9th Street Northwest. We couldn't move them there. And another thing we wanted was a quick reaction force members of the National Guard to be able to respond. I don't think we received that resource either.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. Last point I'll make, Mr. Chairman, and I know I'm slightly over my time. One thing that was clear in previous testimony in this committee, corroborated by this testimony today, is that, troops from National Guard were authorized by the president at the time, Donald Trump, on January 4. They were authorized. It was testified in this committee they were authorized. DC was able to take advantage of them in the capacity that DC wanted to save for the couple of requests that you also wanted. One thing that's important to indicate, Mr. Chairman, is that for National Guard troops to be deployed to the Capitol, it requires the Capitol Police Board to actually issue a state of emergency for troops to come on Capitol grounds. And the police board is made up of the architect of the Capitol, the head of Senate security, the head of House security, and the chief of the Capitol Police. And by my understanding, 3 of those 4 people report to the Speaker of the House. And the Speaker of the House at that time was Nancy Pelosi. So when we want to talk about National Guard being here and the timetable of them getting here, it's important to understand that there were National Guard in the District of Columbia, and their limitation of coming to the Capitol was not due to anybody else, because the president is not authorized to deploy troops to the Capitol, separation of powers. It is at the hands of the Speaker of the House. And with that, I yield, and I apologize for being 1:24 over.
Chair recognizes Ms. Green from Georgia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we should all refresh our memories today and remember history. And who has caused the political violence here in Washington, D.C. by remembering how many times D.C. Metro Police were deployed for dangerous riots. In 2020, where Antifa and BLM rioters violently raged continuously, even nearly burning down the city, hundreds of police officers were injured, and rioters destroyed millions of dollars in property. Riots went to such extreme levels in Lafayette Park that Secret Service forced President Trump into the White House bunker. But all of the extreme left-wing violence didn't just start in 2020. No, it started in 2017 on President Trump's inauguration day. But all you hear about is a 3-hour riot on one single day, January 6, 2021. So let's talk about violent criminals and justice. Chief Conte, you've said what we've got to do if we really want to see homicides go down is keep bad guys with guns in jail. When they are in jail, they can't be in communities shooting people. Keep violent people in jail. Is that right, yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor Bowser, do you agree with Chief Conte? Yes or no?
Yes, until people serve their sentences.
Yes, you agree they should stay in jail. Thank you very much, Mayor. Mr. Graves, you are the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. You have the unique ability to prosecute both local and federal cases. However, Mr. Graves, your office has declined to prosecute 67% of those arrested in 2022, which means they can't stay in jail like Chief Conte is demanding after his police officers do the hard work of arresting these criminals. Instead, you are solely focused on prosecuting January 6 cases from one single day in our history. Meanwhile, D.C. crime is up. Total crime is up 27% from last year. Carjacking up 114%. Murders up 11%. Sexual abuse is up 45%. Property crime is up 30%. And just yesterday morning, a little innocent 12-year-old girl was shot while sleeping in her own bed by another rampant, violent criminal who has probably been previously arrested and not prosecuted. What do you think a resident in Anacostia is more afraid of? Their child catching a stray bullet on Monday, or a grandma walking through the Capitol more than 2 years ago? Mr. Graves, your decision to not prosecute 67% of the crimes in D.C. is absolutely criminal itself. People who are charged with murder have been arrested on average 11 times before because you refuse to keep them in jail like Chief Conte is demanding. You have already abused your position by maliciously prosecuting at least 1,000 people from January 6th, but you recently announced that you're going to arrest at least 1,000 more. Let me remind everyone the manner in which you go about your January 6th prosecutions. A man named Matthew Perna, who had no criminal record, peacefully entered the Capitol through an open door on January 6th. He stayed inside roughly 20 minutes. He didn't assault anyone, not a police officer, anyone. He didn't damage any property. He fully cooperated with the FBI and eventually pled guilty to all charges. But right before his sentencing, you, Mr. Graves, asked the judge for more time to object to the pre-sentence report, by the way, while you weren't prosecuting many of the crimes in D.C. This was so that you could ask for at least a few more years in prison for the guy that walked around in the Capitol for 20 minutes, not assaulting anyone. And this is what you've done repeatedly, over and over, for those who've pled or have been convicted on January 6th. Well, 2 weeks later, Matthew Perna hung himself in his garage, Mr. Graves. He was 37 years old. On March 9th, 2022, you dropped the case against Matthew Perna because he was dead. The time for weaponizing the Department of Justice needs to come to an end. And because you refuse to prosecute real criminals that are violating all the crimes here in Washington, D.C., and you want to talk about D.C. residents, they are victims of your abuse of power. And because of that, I am introducing articles of impeachment on you, Mr. Graves, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Before we recognize Ms. Mace for 5 minutes, I request unanimous consent for the representative from Georgia, Mr. Clyde, to be waived onto the committee for purpose of questioning without objection to order. Chair recognizes Ms. Mace for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our witnesses for being with us today. And crime is rampant in our nation's capital. It's rampant and out of control, like many other cities in the United States. During COVID and now after, crime is up significantly. In D.C., I read that homicides were up by 9% since last year. In fact, there have been more homicides in the first 120 days of 2023 than in the same period of any year in the past decade. We're starting summer, so tourism's going to be up. Violent crime consistently peaks from around the country this time of year as well. And at the same time, the D.C. police force has lost a net of 450 officers over the last 3 years, or almost 15% of the workforce. Mayor Bowser, I do want to recognize what you've done to give bonuses and try to hire police officers to the force. I myself have been a victim of some crime here in D.C., not once but twice now since I've come up here. And, we see this kind of thing around the country, and it's very important that we address it. And we can only leave to the imagination the kind of impression that the rampant crime that's up here in D.C. leaves on the country, to folks who come here from around the country and around the world to see the United States Capitol. We have foreign dignitaries, we have tourists, and we want to project strength and peace and safety for folks who are out here. D.C.'s out-of-control crime must be taken seriously and must be addressed as swiftly as we can. My first question today goes to Mr. Graves, and I have a few yes or no questions. Mr. Graves, do you think the D.C. Council's crime bill that I voted to override in this chamber would have led to an increased officer retention and hiring? Yes or no?
Increased officer retention or hiring is the question?
Yes. Would it have led to better officer retention and hiring? Yes or no?
I'm not sure it would have impacted one way or another. I don't know.
Yes or no, do you think the public should be aware of the crime happening around their neighborhoods and take it seriously?
So we are very much focused on community safety. Part of our community safety
Do you
strategy
think,
is
yes or
making
no,
sure
the public should be aware? The
aware.
question was, public should be aware of crime happening in their neighborhoods?
Yes.
Okay. So you agree, it's a good thing when a citizen reports something they saw, like see something, say something?
Yes.
Yes.
Generally, we want law enforcement or our community members to report crime of which they're aware.
Right. So a couple of days ago at the DC Safety Summit, you said just going out there and kind of fear-mongering and making broad claims that aren't born out of data is not helpful, and I think we unfortunately see that from non-traditional media sometimes. So yes or no, do you think having this hearing today is fear-mongering in DC?
So I appreciate
Yes
the
or no,
opportunity.
do you think that this hearing is fear-mongering in DC based on your comments from a few days ago?
So it's not
Yes
a yes or
or
no. It's
no?
not a
Is
yes or
this
no.
an I don't
I
know?
can answer your question, Congresswoman, but it's not a yes or no question.
It is. I asked it. Yes or no, do you believe it's the job of a prosecutor to represent the government and to prosecute crimes on its behalf?
Yes.
Interesting. So then why are you bringing only a third of the cases brought to you? Why is the DC Police Chief Conti literally calling bullshit on your excuses for not prosecuting 67% of arrests? Was he fear-mongering?
So,
Is your chief of police fear-mongering when he calls BS on your
of course, our
prosecutions?
chief of police is not fear-mongering, but I think you're taking quotes out of context, and if I could provide the context, I'd be happy to
No,
explain.
I'm not interested in that. I'm using your words directly verbatim from you. I want to finish with this afternoon. DC is a lot like Charleston. It's a city that has a lot of charm. It's a city by which many Americans judge our country. We have a high rate of tourism in Charleston, South Carolina. And Charleston takes its crime seriously and has built a community that many want to visit, many want to join, just like Washington, D.C. But the same cannot be said of D.C., which saddens many of us here today. And I want to recognize Mayor again for your efforts with your police force to add more police. More needs to be done, and I'm sure that you recognize that as well. Thank you, and I yield back.